Okay, folks, just some interesting business information for you all, or let's put it this way, not really business, but spiritual business information. I will be going for the birthday of the Baal Shem Tov, which is the 18th day of Elul, which is like the 27th of August, something like that, but I'm leaving a few days before. I will be going for a visit to the gravesite of the Baal Shem Tov. It's called the Tziyun of the Baal Shem Tov, the gravesite of the Baal Shem Tov and various others, but primarily the Baal Shem Tov. And I would be very happy to take with any letters or requests or what they call a pan pidyon nefesh for anyone who would like to send something with. If you don't want me to read it there, but you just want me to place it there, that's fine too. Just let me know. Send me an email with your request, with your prayers, with your whatever it is that you want to send, and I will make sure to take it. Send it to kabbalah@gmail.com. Kabbalah, Kabbalah, decoded, one word, Kabbalah decoded @gmail.com. You know, in other words, the email by which I send out a link every time, and so on. And if anyone wants any special prayers or anything like that, just let me know. If you want me to read them out there, or you don't want me to read them out, and so on and so forth, I'll just place the letter there. So that's in about just over 2 weeks, like 2.5 weeks. So, of course, there won't be any classes while I'm away for about a week. So, okay. We are about to continue with the first chapter of Sefer Yetzirah. The first chapter of Sefer Yetzirah. Let me share screen because I have it here for you to see. Okay, so previously we had spoken about the 32 paths of wisdom, which were the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet plus the 10 Spheroid equals 32. They're called the 32 paths of wisdom. And that was in the previous Mishnah. The first Mishnah, the first teaching in Sefer Yetzirah, spoke about the 3 books, or at least that's the version that the Aryeh Kaplan book on Sefer Yetzirah has it as 3 books. Sefer, which is a book, Sefer, text, and Safar, which is number, or Sipur, communication. As far as the version which I personally prefer, that version says Besofer, with the author, Sefer, the book, and Sipur, the story, the unfolding of the story, which means, as I explained the first time, that the author is involved in the story. It's not just a story about, it is a story that he's reading, so to speak. In other words, the unfolding of history, the unfolding of whatever it is, consciousness that happens with divine guidance. It doesn't just happen by itself. It's not something that happened, so to speak, in the past. It's an ongoing issue, an ongoing event. All right, let me just see if there's a chat over there. You could send it to my address as well if you don't want anyone to see what it says. I mean, no one will see what it says. If you don't want me to see what it says, then yes, you can send a letter. Just address it to the Baal Shem Tov, not to me. Oh, I suppose you'll have to address it to me. That will get to me. But just address it to me, Rabbi Miller, for the Baal Shem Tov or whatever. And the address is here. I'll type it in the message box. 2929 West Greenleaf Ave. Ave, Chicago. Why am I not typing properly here? Chicago, IL 60645. Okay, let me just put that in the chat, and you can copy it if you want. Okay, that's where to send it to. Okay, folks. And again, I will take it. If you don't want me to read it, just say don't read or something like that, just on the outside of the letter, don't read, and I'll just drop it there. All right, good. Let us go now to the third Mishnah in the first chapter. So it says like this. I'm just going to read the Hebrew and then I'll come to the English shortly. Esa Sphirot Blima. במספר 10 אצבעות, 5 כנגד 5, וברית יחיד מכוון באמצע, במילת הלשון ובמילת המאור. Okay, the 10 Sphirot of nothingness in the number of 10 fingers. In other words, just like you have 10 fingers, so there's 10 Sphirot, and they're called the 10 Sphirot of nothingness, which I will explain shortly. 5 opposite 5. In other words, 5 of the right hand, 5 of the left hand, with a singular covenant precisely in the middle, and I'll discuss that too, in the circumcision of the tongue and in the circumcision of the membrum. Membrum means the male organ. Okay, now what's going on over here? What on earth are we talking about? What are we talking about here? So, first of all, the 10 Sphirot of nothingness we discussed in the first Mishnah. I believe it was the first Mishnah that we spoke about the 10 Sphirot of nothingness. Let me just check and make sure it's the first one. No, it was the second Mishnah, I'm sorry. The second Mishnah, the 10 Sphirot of nothingness, and I explained there that there are different explanations of what that means. One of the explanations is that this is talking about the light of the Sphirot, but not the vessels of the Sphirot, because the vessels of the Sphirot is what gives it limitation and gives it substance, so to speak. Whereas the light of the Sphira is sort of the energy. Let me give an analogy. An analogy for this would be, for example, a word spelled out, right? So you have a word, let's say, I don't know, let's just say the word play, okay? P-L-A-Y. So that word has a meaning. The meaning of the word is like the light in the word, so to speak. But the vessels of the word are the letters P-L-A-Y, right? The letters P-L-A-Y spell the word play and convey a certain idea. That idea doesn't exist as a physical thing per se. It is understood from anyone who speaks English and knows what the word play means. Now, in Hebrew, but not really in English, in Hebrew, you have various combinations of words, and this is actually one of the techniques that practical Kabbalah uses. One of the techniques is to switch the letters of a word around. The classic example is the word tzohar. I'm sure I've said this example many times, probably too many times, but let me just, major mistake. I didn't mean to do that. What I meant to do was show you a whiteboard, and I will show you the word tzohar. Okay, so the word tzohar in Hebrew is spelled this way, yeah, tzohar. So when God tells Noah to make the ark, he tells him to make the ark, and then he says, tzohar ta'aseh leteva, make a window for the ark. Now, there is a discussion amongst the sages whether it means a window or an opening. In other words, is it a blank window and sort of a glass-covered window kind of thing, or is it an opening? Never mind which one it is, but the word tzohar, basically, the intention is something that lets in light into the ark, right? It's lets light into the ark. Now, interestingly enough, the word for ark in Hebrew is teva. Yeah, teva. I'll spell that in a minute. In Hebrew, teva is the word for ark. It's spelled as follows in Hebrew. That's supposed to be a letter bet. Didn't work out too well, but in modern Hebrew, if you want to write it in classical Hebrew, it would look like this. The classical form of Hebrew, teva. So the word teva means an ark. It also means a word. So in other words, God was telling Noah when he told him to make a window in the ark, he was telling him to make a window in his words as well. Make a source of light in your words. The words shouldn't just be empty words comprised of letters, which are the vessels, but the word should be with an opening that brings light into the words. In other words, there's meaning behind it and multiple layers of meaning. Now, the way the Baal Shem Tov explains this, which is very interesting teaching, and this is a fundamental teaching in Kabbalah as well, how this is done is that the word Zohar, I'm assuming everyone can see the whiteboard. Yes, I'm assuming that. Good. Okay. So the word Zohar. Sorry, I didn't switch my phone off. Okay. The word Zohar actually can be spelt in a number of different ways. One of the ways that it is spelt is as follows: Tzara. In other words, it's a different permutation, but the same letters, right? Same letters, different permutation. The word tzara means trouble. Et tzara hi leYaakov. It's a time of trouble. It's a troubled time for Jacob. Jacob means the Jewish people. The Jewish people are sometimes called Yisrael, Israel. They're sometimes called Yaakov, Jacob, and other names as well, Yeshurun. But they primarily called Jacob or Israel. Jacob for the lower level of the Jewish people when they're on a lower level, and Israel when they're on a higher level. Jacob's name was changed to Israel subsequently when he defeated the angel. In other words, he fought with certain spiritual forces and overcame them. He was victorious over them. So when it says Et tzara li hi leYaakov, it is a time of trouble for Jacob. So the Baal Shem Tov explains as follows. He says you have to take that tzara, that word tzara, and turn it into Zohar, turn it into a source of light. You have to turn the trouble into a source of light. Now, how do you do that? Well, he says as follows. There's some intermediate steps. There are some who can simply turn it around. They know how to do it. In other words, the letter Hey just has to come. This letter has to come between these two, right? And then it changes it into that. Let's see now. I want to make less of a mess over here, so I'm going to undo. Okay, good. So the Baal Shem Tov explains that for the average person, there are intermediate steps. What are the intermediate steps? The intermediate steps are also comprised of different permutations of the same three letters. Haratz. Now, it would be the same letter, except that this letter at the end, that letter, when it's at the end of a word, takes on a different form. In classical writing, it would look like this, right? Sort of like that, kind of like an iron. But let's not go there. Actually, let me. That would be the tzaddik sofit at the end. But since we're not doing proper Hebrew over here, I'm just going to write it as the tzaddik. Okay, so you can see how that's the same letters. Now, haratz means one who runs, right? One who runs, and then the next permutation is this over here. The word spells rotzeh, one who runs, run, right, to do what God wants, rotzeh, the will of God. One who runs to do the will of God can change over tzara, trouble, into a source of light. And that's what we all have to do. We have to run with alacrity and eagerness to confront issues and not run away from them, but run towards them, because they can be, with the right attitude and the right positive mindset, that troubles can be turned into a source of light. You have to just make sure that you're doing what it is that the Almighty wants. Now, how do you do that? Okay, that's a good question. But for that, one needs the advice of people who are familiar with these things. That's called in the Hebrew term is a mashpia, or a rabbi, or someone who a mentor, a spiritual mentor, which is an important part of certainly of Hasidic, of the Hasidic approach, that one should have a mentor. Is a reason that the hay is in the middle. Yes, there is a reason that the hay is in the middle. One of the reasons is because this word over here, just these two letters here, if you would join them together, spells the word tsar. Tsar means narrow, confined, restricted, constricted, right? So the hay is dividing between those two, but at the same time, the hay is also joining those two. The tzaddik, there are different explanations that I don't want to get too far off the subject, but this letter is pronounced as tzadi or tzaddik. Tzaddik can mean in Hebrew, also means a righteous person. The reish, so that would be tzaddik. And then the reish stands for the word rasha, the wicked. So you have to separate the wicked and the good with godliness so that they can come together as a window of opportunity, as a tzohar. Tevel ta'aseh letzohar, make a, tzohar ta'aseh letevel, make a window for the ark, for the word, so that a tzaddik, a rasha, a wicked person, can be transformed into a tzaddik. In fact, that's the objective of the book of the Tanya. It's called Tanya, written by Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi. The objective of his book is to at least get to the intermediate stage between a wicked person and a completely righteous, saintly person. And that's called the Beinoni, the in-between person. Okay. In any event, we can see how the letters themselves, when they are in a meaningful permutation, the truth is that all permutations are ultimately meaningful. They are ultimately meaningful, but not necessarily in human language. Like there are bricks which build a structure. Each letter is like a brick compared to a stone, actually, to a stone or a brick, and they build different structures in different permutations. So the Spheroid, when we speak about, therefore, where was I? Share screen again. When we speak about the 10 Sphirot of nothingness, which is what we're talking about over here, the 10 Sphirot of nothingness, right? The 10 Sphirot of nothingness, that's talking about the 10 Sphirot in the light, not the 10 Sphirot of the vessels, not the 10 Sphirot of the letters, but the 10 Sphirot of the light in the letters, the light that is conveyed by the combinations of letters. So these 10 Sphirot of nothingness have the same number as the 10 fingers, the 10 fingers of the hands and the 10 fingers of the feet, the 10 toes of the feet, in other words, right? Now, why is this important? Because everything in Kabbalah can be understood on many different levels. And here's an example of it. You have 10 Sphirot of nothingness that are paralleled by the 10 fingers that a person has. What are his 10 fingers there for? His 10 fingers, a person's 10 fingers are there to provide, to change the world around the person, to make it into a holy place. That's what the 10 fingers and the 10 toes, if the truth be told, are there for, right? That's what they're there for. These are 10 different levels. That's why there's 10 fingers and not just one finger or two fingers or whatever, or three, right? There are 10 different levels, but the idea is that there's a 10 fingers, 5 on the right and 5 on the left, as he says now. Chamesh keneged chamesh, 5 opposite 5, 5 opposite 5, 5 on the right and 5 on the left. And what's the purpose of having 5 on the right and 5 on the left? So they should be able to come into a proper balance. The idea is that the balance between two opposites is a higher state than the opposites themselves. Now, If we want to understand this a little bit better, let me give you a diagram of the Spheroid. Yeah, here's a diagram of the Spheroid now. Generally, when we're talking about the world of Tikkun, in other words, the world of rectification, the world that happened subsequent to the original creation. The initial creation was the creation of chaos. In the beginning, it says like this, God created the heavens and the earth, and the earth was in a state of chaos. It was chaotic. In other words, there was no order on the earth. There was no order there. Now, what does that mean that there was no order? It just means that one of the explanations according to the Arizal, it means that the columns, the Sphirot, were arranged in only two columns, one column on the right and another column on the left, right? Another column on the left. And those two columns were in a state of conflict. They were in a state of constant conflict, and that's why they fell apart. In the world of Tikkun, the Sphirot are not arranged in two columns. They're arranged in three columns. The middle column is the primary balancer and the area that brings a balance between right and left. And that's the way the Sphirot are now. Now, why is it then that the human being is created with 5 on the right, 5 on the right hand, and 5 of the left hand? Because the right hand and the left hand are really only extensions, so to speak, of the torso, of the main aspect of the body. The main torso of the body goes from head all the way down to the feet, right? And we see that there are two areas primarily. There's actually 3 areas. I should be more careful about what I say. There are actually 3 areas where there is a balance between these things, where the Sphirot, there's certain Sphirot that bring about that balance. What are those areas? Well, of course, the first one is Keter, right? Keter is between the two of them. Keter is between the two of them as the source of all of the Sphirot. And therefore, of course, in Keter, they are balanced. Let's go further down, not in Keter, excluding Keter, because Keter is a transcendent Sphira, whereas we want to talk now only about the immanent Sphirot. The immanent Sphirot are these Sphirot over here, excluding Keter. When you don't count Keter, you count Da'at instead. All right, so now, let's explain the middle column. The first Sphira on the middle column, therefore, is Da'at, if we're excluding Keter. The first one is Da'at. What does Da'at balance out? It balances out Chokhmah and Bina. It balances out the state of Chokhmah, which is always in a state of emerging from nothingness and returning to nothingness. Whereas Bina is in a state of somethingness. Bina is in a state of somethingness. That's why the word Bina is related to the word Boneh. Boneh means to build. Because Bina builds a presence for Chokhmah. Bina builds a presence for Chokhmah. That is why Chokhmah is called the father Sphira, so to speak, or Abba. Yeah, Chokhmah is called Abba, and Bina is called the mother, because how does it work? The father produces the seed, but the seed is in a state of nothingness. In other words, the father is a man's sperm, right? The seed is in a state of nothingness. And yes, it is something, it is there, but it's certainly not a living creature. Where does it become a living creature? When it's in the womb of Bina, in the womb of the mother, then it becomes a living creature. It develops and it grows, and eventually it emerges from Bina and becomes its the child, so to speak, of Bina, or the children of Bina. Now, what is it that keeps the balance between Chokhmah and Bina? That's the Sphira of Da'at. Da'at is generally described as not only knowledge, but also the concept of hargasha, the idea of feeling. Chokhmah is transcendent to a certain extent. Bina is manifested. And to keep a balance between that returning to nothing and being something, Chokhmah and Bina, is one of the functions of Da'at, and that's why Da'at is, in a sense, it replaces Keter. Keter, which is above here, it replaces Keter. How does it replace Keter? Because since Keter is not manifested, it's a transcendent Sphira. Therefore, Da'at is the manifestation of Chokhmah and Bina together. You could say, in a sense, that although Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, the lowest Sphirot, here, these lowest Sphirot, the lowest Sphirot, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, that's the male Zeir Anpin, and Malchut is called Nukva, the female Sphira, the primarily female that's generated from Bina. This is the male aspect that's generated from Bina, Zeir Anpin and Malchut. But in order to ensure that there's a proper balance between Chokhmah and Bina, that comes about through Da'at. And Da'at is related to the concept, very much related to the concept of Dveikut, a subject which I hope to discuss tomorrow night, or at least begin to discuss tomorrow night, the concept of Dveikut, cleaving. Because the first time that we see the word Da'at used in the sense is right in the beginning of after man was created, after Adam and Eve were created, or Adam was created and Eve was separated from him. It says, Va'adam yada es chava, right? Man knew, Adam knew Eve. Adam knew Eve. What does it mean, knew her? He knew her intimately. There was an intimate relationship. Now, in a physical sense, that means that they had a physical relationship. They were physically coupled together. Right, but it also means on a much deeper level, and here's where we start to get to the idea of what the middle column essentially represents. So let me just continue a little bit further, and you'll see what I mean. Again, the middle column here is Keter, Da'at, Tiferet, Yesod, and ultimately Malchut. Now, when you rearrange these Sphirot so that there's only two columns, so it goes like this: Chokhmah, there's Chokhmah, Chesed, Tiferet, Netzach, Chokhmah, Chesed, Tiferet, Netzach, and Chokhmah, Da'at, Chesed, Tiferet, Netzach, Yesod, and on the other side would be Bina, Gvura, Hod and Malchut, right? That would be the left column. Okay, so these two columns are then brought together, and that is, let's look at the text again, and you will see, new share. One second, new share. Okay, where are we here? We are, what happened here? I don't know. Right, stop sharing for a minute. Let me just get rid of that. That's Kabbalah Decoded, where everything is posted afterwards. Share screen. Okay. Let's see now. Where is? It seems to have disappeared. I must have closed it by mistake. Oh, no, I didn't close it. Here it is. Here we go. Can everyone see it? Sorry, I'm not sure that you can see it. Can someone just let me know in the chat if you can see it? Things are not working out that well today. I don't know why, but they're not. Yeah, we just see you. You see me. I see. All right. We have to do something about this. I don't know why it's not showing. Maybe I have too many things open. Maybe that's the simple solution. Close a few extra things. Yes. Okay. Let's see here. All right. I don't know why it's not showing now. It was showing before, but let me see if there's something I can do here. All right. All right. Well, I guess forget about it. We'll just we will just have to deal with it as is. Stop share, and maybe, I don't know, maybe I'll try it again. Oh, here we go now. There you are. Okay, good. All right, now we got it. Okay, so we have in the number of 10 fingers, 5 opposite 5. And then he goes on to say, with a singular covenant precisely in the middle, a singular covenant precisely in the middle. What's the singular covenant precisely in the middle? That is the Sphira of Yesod, the Ot Habrit, the sign of the covenant, right? The sign of the covenant, the Sphira of Yesod, which is what brings the two things together, just as the sign of the covenant, which corresponds to the male organ, brings together male and female, right? By copulation, obviously, by relationships. But that relationship brings together the male and female sides of the male and female columns of the Spheroid. The right column, the male column, the left column, the female column, or if you want to put it like this, Zeir, Anpin, and Malchut. But it goes much further. It is not only that there is a coupling in a physical sense, there is also a coupling in a communication sense, and as I'll explain, there's also a coupling in an intellectual sense, and that's what we need to examine a little bit more. Now, let me explain what I mean. We said there's a covenant, a singular covenant that corresponds to the male organ. As everybody knows, I'm sure, the male organ is the place where the sign of the covenant, which is called in Hebrew Brit Milah, the sign of the covenant is done, the circumcision. A man is circumcised in Jewish tradition, a man is circumcised in Arab tradition as well, in other words, Muslim tradition as well. Men are circumcised at different ages, but a boy should be circumcised ideally at 8 days. If he is well, if he's not well or whatever, then obviously they postpone it. If a person is not circumcised, they can circumcise at 8 days. They can get circumcised at any time throughout their life. But preferably the sooner the better, because that gives the person the ability to combine opposites even in the physical world. But the combining of opposites is not restricted to the physical world, which you might think it is, but it's not. It goes into the emotional world as well. How does the connection between the emotional in the emotional world happen? That happens through the circumcision of the tongue. Yeah, the circumcision of the tongue. Now, what does it mean, the circumcision of the tongue? It means that there is a higher level of circumcision, just as men have circumcision in the male organ, there's also circumcision of the tongue. Now, this is not a physical operation. Don't anybody get worried. Circumcision of the tongue means that one is careful about the words one says and how to use words in the proper manner. Words are very, very powerful things. The entire creation came about through divine speech. And the entire destruction, unfortunately, can also come about through speech. As we know, speech can be a very devastating tool used against people, even more devastating than physical harm. Mental harm that's caused by speech can be permanent and long-lasting, unfortunately. But when we're talking about a circumcised tongue, that is a tongue that does not spew out negativity, hatred, and so on and so forth. It is a tongue that produces that which will cause a meeting of hearts. That's what this is all about. The idea of 5 opposite 5 come together through speech, through positive speech, through speaking one's words in a positive manner and carefully in order to build up. Now, obviously, it is always possible to look at things from 2 points of view. You can always look at it from the point of view of what is imperfect therein, or what is on the way to perfection therein. In other words, what's already been, let's say, rectified. It might not be perfect, but at least it's not bad. So there are two types of people. There are people who always focus on the negativity, and that negativity, unfortunately, focusing on negativity is a very destructive thing. There's a saying, a Hasidic saying, that you cannot drive out the darkness with a stick, right? You have to light a candle in order to chase out the darkness. What happened there? I don't know, but all right, 1 second. I don't need. The darkness is chased out with light. So of course one can focus on the negative, and of course we know that there are many people that do, but the Kabbalistic way, and certainly the Hasidic manner, is always to focus on the little bit of light that there is, even if it's a tiny bit, and to increase it, rather than try and drive out the darkness, because driving out the darkness just ain't gonna work. So that's the circumcision of the tongue. We use the tongue, we use communication, we use words to light the situation up. If you remember correctly, the word, what we said before, Tzoha Tas Elateva, make a window for the ark, means also make a window for words, as I explained before. And the idea of making a window for words is to bring light through your words into a situation. Of course, if you can't bring light into a situation, the best thing to do is be quiet. Yeah, don't say anything, which might not always be easy, but the best thing to do probably in such circumstances would be to be quiet. But if one's tongue is circumcised, in other words, if one is careful about how one speaks, and you speak using only the positive, then you will find that this generates light in other people. But there's another way of generating light in other people. And that is, well, we spoke about the circumcision of the member, and we spoke about that before. But there's another way, and this is a very interesting thing that we're going to speak about somewhat later on as well. This is a new discovery in a scientific paper that I was just reading, actually, a couple of days ago, and it talks about there's a theory, they haven't proven anything, but in Kabbalistic terminology, in Kabbalistic practice, it is proven. That is that it can be a meeting of minds without words and without actions. When people meet together, it's an interesting thing. The article explains as follows, that generally, let's say you're walking with somebody, right? You're walking with somebody. It's a natural thing if people are more or less the same height. We're not talking about a little child and an adult, but two adults, especially if the adults are the same size or the same gender, even better, even more so, because their way of walking is familiar. But if as they're walking, you'll find, and they've done many tests on this, that as people are walking together, they kind of fall into step with each other. They fall into step with each other. What does that mean? It means simply that they start to synchronize their movements unconsciously. Now, that's as far as the physical is concerned. Their steps match each other. Take it a step further, to use an unintended pun. If you take it one step further, when people are speaking together, very often their voices, or their modes of expression rather, start to match each other. If one is speaking in a high-pitched, excited manner, the other one will also become more high-pitched and more excited generally. That often happens. Action and reaction kind of thing. Now, the scientists posit that there's a possibility that this happens with minds as well. In other words, not just with actions, not just with speech, but actually with mind. it happens with minds as well. Now, they're not sure of how it happens, but I'm going to explain it to you the way it is explained in Kabbalistic works. This, in fact, is a known matter, and I'll give you an example of it. There was a story that I read recently. There's a certain Rabbi Grossman, who was a very successful rabbi in Israel. He's the rabbi of a place called Migdal HaEmek in Israel. He happens to be a very, very fine person, very successful person. I knew his father. I don't know him very well, but I knew his father. His father would come to teach once a week in the yeshiva and seminary, the rabbinical seminary that I was in Israel. He would come there to teach. Very refined, very brilliant man. In any event, the son tells the story that he was once with his spiritual teacher. A spiritual teacher in the Hasidic world is called a Rebbe, right? A Rebbe. The Rebbe, the Baal Shem Tov, for example, right? So, or the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the spiritual guide of a person. So, this Rabbi Grossman was with his Rebbe, the Lelove Rebbe, and they happened to be up in Miron at the time. Miron is where Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is buried. Yes, the burial site of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the author of the Zohar, the Rashbi, the author of the Zohar. And that's a whole discussion in and of itself. If people are questioning it, we can discuss that another time. I wrote a number of articles on this. If you want to go to ascent.org or KabbalahOnline.org, you'll see a number of articles I wrote on the authenticity of the Zohar. A number of articles. Freely available. Okay, let's not discuss that now, but it so happened that this Rabbi Grossman was with his Rebbe, and they were in Miron, and the Baba Sali he passed away a number of years ago. The Baba Sali was a very great Kabbalist of the Sephardi tradition. Sephardi means they came from originally those countries that had been conquered by Spain. So he was from Morocco. Morocco was one of the countries that was conquered by Spain. And there are still some Moroccans, not so much anymore, who actually speak Spanish. But a lot of the countries in that part of the world, in the Middle East, were actually conquered. Some were conquered by France, some were conquered by Spain, and so on and so forth. In any event, so he was, so those are called Sephardim because they're from Spheroid, Spain, in Hebrew, originally. So he was from Morocco, and he was a very great Kabbalist. And I actually spent quite a lot of, I spent a number of holidays with the Baba Sali. And it was quite an experience, I can tell you. He's a very, very holy man. Anyway, one day he said to his attendant, he had an attendant who happened not to be there for that Shabbat, for that Saturday, for that holiday, for that Sabbath. And when the later that night, when the attendant came back, he said to him, "Where were you?" "I was in Jerusalem." The Baba Sali lived in a place called Netivot, which is sort of in the south of Israel. In any event, so he said to him, "Where were you?" "I was in Jerusalem." And where did you go?" "I was at the Lelove Rebbe, and he's on his way up now to Miron." So the Baba Sali said, "He's on his way to Miron. I'm going to Miron as well. Get a car and let's go up to Miron." So they went up to Miron. At this time, the Baba Sali was actually, he was pretty old. He was probably in his 80s. He died in his 90s. He passed away. But let's go up to Miron. So they went up to Miron. Now from the south to Miron takes much longer than Jerusalem. So anyway, Rabbi David Lelev, to cut a long story short, my apologies, Rabbi David of Lelev was already there, and the Baba Sali walked in. Baba Sali with his nickname, his name is Rabbi Yisrael Abu Chatzera, right? So he walked in, and the Lelove Rebbe, the Lelove Rebbe immediately stood up and greeted him, and so on and so forth. And they sat down, and they just looked at each other, for about 20 minutes to half an hour. No one said a word. And there were people listening to the conversation. They wanted to hear what they would say. There was no conversation. And after about a half hour, the Baba Sali gets up and he says, okay, so that settles it. And he went in to visit the gravesite of the Rashbi, Ramashim Yochai, and then he went home. Now you may ask what's going on. And I'll get back to you in a second. What was going on was later explained by the Leleber Rebbe to this Rabbi Grossman. He said to him, there was a situation of danger, which is why I came up to Meron in the first place. Israel was in a situation of danger. There was going to be an attack by Iraq and Iran on Israel. And when the Baba Sali came, together we agreed that they should rather attack each other. And that's in fact what happened. This was in the 80s, right? The Iraq-Iran war, and went on for a long time. We agreed that they should rather attack each other rather than attack Israel. And in fact, that's what happened. And all of this was communicated without a word between them. How did they do that? That's what I want to illustrate, this idea that things can happen between minds. You call it telepathy, telecommunication, whatever it is. I'll explain it in a minute, but that's actually what happened. Now, how do we explain this? How does it work? It works in the following way. A person has 5 levels of soul, or what would probably easier to be called 5 levels of consciousness. Now, your own physical consciousness, in other words, the consciousness of your body and the consciousness of the world around you that you experience through your senses, is the lowest level of consciousness. Above that, there's emotional consciousness, and then there's intellectual consciousness, and then there are 2 levels of transcendent consciousness. So what happens when great sages, great Kabbalists, great saintly people communicate, they can communicate from soul to soul. In other words, from one level of soul to another, where there doesn't have to be any physical conversation. They understand each other because they're on the same wavelength. So even though scientists haven't been able to explain, because they can't find a physical process in the brain that doesn't use various chemical and electrical processes that can transfer via space to another brain, but they can't understand consciousness that's not physical, right? For scientists, consciousness is a process that goes on in the brain. And the truth is that they know that you can't really explain consciousness as processes that go on in the brain. It's much more than that. And they know it, but they can't explain it. In any event, that's what it is. It's various levels of consciousness and communication which happen. So this Mishnah is dealing with the idea not only of the circumcision of the tongue, the circumcision of the male organ, the circumcision of the tongue, but also the circumcision, in a sense, I suppose you could say the circumcision of the mind. When the mind leaves aside the physicality and the limiting factors and focuses on the godliness within, then one is able to communicate with another mind on the same level, another soul essentially on the same level, and discuss things in that way. Let me address some of the questions which came up over here. 10 Spheroid of nothing is equal to 10 fingers, which will be used to change the world for good. Is this the reason why the 10 Spheroid in a state of nothingness? Because I'm always in a state of becoming. Excellent point, Yael. Yes, that is an excellent way of putting it. You got it. That concept was taught to us in Psych. In other words, this idea of patterning, as you call it, where you will fall into the same rhythm and so on when you're walking. We're taught to use in certain situations as needed to calm the patient because they tend to match your mood, demeanor. Yes, excellent. That is true. Yeah, and that's what we do in coaching as well. Although in the coaching that I do, it's much more on a subconscious level, I would say. superconscious level, maybe. Okay. I do believe that words are not always needed for communication to occur. However, when we close with someone, when we are close with someone, we're able to communicate without words or touch. Yes. Yes. Without words or without touch, and without even facial expressions. It could be, and we know that this is indeed the case, because we know that tzaddikim, great saintly people, are able to communicate across very long, vast distances with one another without a word passing in between them. No telegrams, no words, no letters, no nothing. So yes, that actually happens without touch, without words, without facial expressions. Why? Because their minds are on the same wavelength. In other words, their souls are in a state of yichud and zivug. Yeah, yichud and zivug. That's what you would call it. And that is a very important. That is a very important approach. That is a very important approach to communication. Attempting to communicate with the divine mind, essentially, attempting to pick up God's messages without having to read it in the words, because that's happening as well. It's not only person to person, obviously. It's much more so from above to below, from the supernal mind, so to speak. In other words, from the Sphira of Chochmah, or even the Sphira of Keter, the transcendent Sphira of Keter, into our unconsciousness, and hopefully we're able to dredge that up into consciousness. But that's what happens when one has unconscious realizations that then become conscious. That's really what happens. It's the divine mind communicating these realizations to us, and eventually we quantum non-local. I mean, that's up to interpretation, exactly what we mean by quantum over here, but I think that's what you quantum, according to the scientists, quantum is a physical thing. The way we would understand it is we're not talking about something physical here. We're talking about something on a much higher plane of consciousness than, but it's not local, that's for sure. Yeah, through this divine chokhmah, absolutely. Creative in writing is, yes, it's being able to present things in words. When we're done with one with Hashem, yeah, that's lekut. That's what da'at brings about. When it says Adam yada et Chava, man, Adam knew Eve. Adam knew Eve, doesn't mean that he knew her carnally or physically. Only, obviously, they didn't know, they had a physical relationship as well, but it was a much deeper relationship than that. They knew each other, not just physically, not just emotionally, not just intellectually, but they knew each other in terms of superior consciousness, in terms of their transcendent consciousnesses. I know it's not good English, but still. Okay, so that is the third Mishnah in the first chapter of Sefer Yetzirah. Any other questions, ladies and gentlemen? Okay, it looks like there's no other questions coming. We'll leave it at that. Tomorrow night there will be a class. And again, the class will be starting to understand more this concept of a dveikut. Same time, yeah, 8 o'clock tomorrow night. Same link, same time, same link. Different topic. Okay, this will be, this has been recorded and will be posted shortly when I get around to it.